country to reach that 70% threshold of vaccinations.
That's Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin talking about the effort to turn Lumen Field, home of the Seahawks and Sounders, into a mass vaccination site. How's that going to work? When can you sign up? Will getting vaccinated there prevent the Seahawks from trading Russell Wilson? Well, we're going to answer most of those questions today and a whole lot more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. My co-host, he buys ink by the barrelful and buys baking flour by the metric ton, none other than Kevin Schofield from Seattle City Council Insight. Hello to you, sir.
Hey, and just to be clear, the views expressed by me are Russell Wilson's.
Yep. Here's hoping, man. Someone's got to keep him around town here. Our thanks always to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're not in business on the first floor of City Hall, but they sure are at the Henry Art Gallery. Please do support them, other small businesses too. Thanks also to our patrons. David has joined us this week. Thank you, sir. And please get back to me, David, with your address. You have qualified for a very special Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. We ship these out to our $10 patrons and above, so we thank you for joining in there. We're asking people to pledge at that level for one of these beauties here. And our mugshot of the week, another winner from our patron, Rob. And check this out, Kevin. He asked his mug to pose for a photo, but he couldn't because he was in a meeting. I want to give you the visual here, folks. It's a still frame of 4 mugs set up in a gallery view of a virtual meeting. Our Seattle News, Views, and Brews mug holding a pen. You got Wonder Woman there. The mug from West Seattle has a headset on. Rob, the creativity is off the charts. Thank you so much. Kevin, what'd you make of this?
I'm a little jealous. I wish I were half that creative.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for doing that, Rob. If you want to be featured on the show, folks, become a patron on Patreon. We're asking you to join in at the $10 level if you can. We'll get you a mug and we'll get your mug shot on the program here. Finally, thanks to Converge Media, which runs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get things going with right here, right now. So here we go with the third week of March, the Ides of March, generally believed to refer to March 15th. Good historical knowledge to know, but what a bummer for Julius Caesar back in 44 BC. Anyway, present day, we've got some council business to consider here, including a vote to support home-occupied businesses, bringing business home, sponsored by Dan Strauss on the Land Use Committee, Council President Gonzalez, Council Member Mosqueda too. Kevin, we touched on this a couple of weeks ago. Basically, this is some flexibility for a year for home businesses so they don't have to meet the requirements of can't look like a business from the outside, can only schedule customers to come in, that kind of a thing. This really came to light with a business in Ballard. Yonder Cider there was allowing tasting, selling its wares there. Does have a liquor license, business license, all that, but a neighbor anonymously turned him in for violating city codes. Now that business will be able to open again. Kevin, overall thoughts here. What impact do you think bringing business home is going to have?
Well, I can tell you what the city council wants to do. They wanted to be able to create a whole new generation of, start up in your garage businesses, right? They can then sort of grow and move into retail districts and move from there. It's a little bit controversial. Councilmember Peterson actually voted against this in committee. And the question that he'd raised, and actually Councilmember Juarez raised it too, was, is this creating competition against existing businesses? Is this, in fact, not a level playing field? Does this make it even harder for those struggling retail businesses that actually, have, a lease storefront in one of our neighborhood business districts?
They followed the rules, did what they had to do.
Followed all the rules. They're paying for, triple net lease. They're doing all that stuff. And now they've got, new competition out of somebody's garage that's super cheaper, right? So, Peterson said, is that really a good thing? And Juarez started there and kind of convinced herself that this would be okay.
For a year. It's important to put that in perspective.
For a year, although, it's interesting. This is an interim regulation. And, the council has a couple choices. They can do an interim regulation under state law for 6 months.
Right.
Or they can do it for 12 months. If they do it for 12 months, then there has to be built into it a work plan to study those regulations and what recommendations they might make going forward, or whether they might make them permanent. So, So, at the very least, the city is going to study whether any of these changes should be permanent.
Right. I just wonder what happens long term here, because it looks like it's great news for Yonder, which is clearly the issue where this started here in Strauss's district there. But I wonder what happens if more businesses like this do come online. Neighbors start getting worried about parking, et cetera, because you want to attract people to your business. You'll advertise, I guess, an address or whatever else. I mean, this all started with some anonymous complaints about what was going on here. Will more complaints come in? The city has to investigate those. Where do you see that piece of it coming?
I think we're just going to have to see.
Yeah.
These are unusual times.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're going to be unusual times for at least a few more months.
Yeah.
The vaccines are rolling out pretty quickly right
Yep.
now, but
Yep.
we're still locked down for a while.
Yeah.
And which is going to happen first? Is the vaccination situation and the lockdown going to ease up, and suddenly we can go back and start going to all those restaurants and storefronts and all those things that we used to in the neighborhood business districts?
We're not in our homes as much. Yeah.
Or we're going to be at this for a while and really need more time for garage businesses to incubate themselves right there.
Yeah.
I think at this moment in time, it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, it is.
Which way that's going to go.
Yeah, we're in that moment of flux, aren't we, between being very much in the midst of the pandemic right now and trying to work our way out of it. Not going to be an overnight thing, that's for sure. We'll see what the impacts of this bill are over the spring and summer. But I did want to move on to another piece here. Following up on this concept of free legal counsel for people dealing with evictions, the council is set to approve this too this week. Kevin, you pointed this out last week. The language of the bill not really clear on how this ordinance would be funded into the future. I'm going to give people some background here. So in 2021, the city budget has $218,000 going to the Housing Justice Project, $340,000 to the Tenant Law Center. These groups help out tenants in these types of cases. The council says the Housing Justice Project might need another $100,000 to get through the year with this new ordinance now in place. But I'm looking at this long term, Kevin, and I'm trying to figure out where the money comes to pay for this in the future, because the bill itself says, and it's very vague here, the city will need to commit ongoing funding to attorneys equipped to represent tenants. What does that mean? What do you draw from this?
Oh, and just going back one step, $100,000.
Yeah,
that depends entirely on when the eviction moratorium is lifted, right?
And end of March, as it stands right now.
If it's lifted pretty soon, and then suddenly there's a rash of evictions, and and all those tenants have a right to an attorney, it could get incredibly expensive very quickly.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. But at this point, this is an unfunded mandate. This isn't just the city saying, oh, let's double the amount of money that we're already giving to Housing Justice Project and one other organization to do this work. It's saying it's establishing a new right to counsel.
Yeah.
So every single one of those tenants, no matter how much they make, no matter what their issue is, no matter why they're being evicted, they have the right to counsel, to city provided counsel.
Do you feel like the city might be, or the council might be, tipping its hand that it really does want to extend that eviction moratorium? Or do you have any thought about that in the way this was put together?
Well, certainly Councilmember Sawant has been very vocal in the fact that she wants to extend it. And already the council has passed something saying that it's extended 6 months beyond the end of the
pandemic,
pandemic,
declared pandemic.
Right. And the pandemic, the end of the pandemic isn't going to get declared for months and months and months. So there's no immediate danger of that ending. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So in fact, I would be shocked if any evictions, like that happened before the end of the year, right? Because they would basically, they would have to lift the pandemic by July 1st, and that's almost certainly not going to happen.
Yeah, there are a lot of changes that have to happen before that. Keep going,
Yeah. So what does it mean for this year's budget? Probably not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But after that, starting with next year, they're really going to have to figure out, what this looks like.
Right.
How much it'll really cost to do this. San Francisco, which is a slightly larger city than Seattle, it's spending about $10 million a year on this.
Yeah.
And the estimate for Seattle, and they went along with this bill from their staff, was $750,000.
Right, 750,000. Yeah.
And Newark, New Jersey, which is a much smaller city than Seattle, is already spending $750,000 to $1 million a year.
Wow.
This, right. So this could be multiple millions of dollars. That goes into it. And again, that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. Right.
Because it's where do you find that money?
The government has chosen to say that the way we deal with evictions is by putting these people into court.
In the courtroom.
The courtroom that we have. And that, in in many cases, not every landlord can afford an attorney,
Right.
but for the ones who can, it creates a huge advantage for them by putting this through the regular court. So it's not ridiculous for the government to say, okay, since we're making these people go to court over this stuff, we should provide them an attorney.
Right. We're going to watch how this one pans out. And I should point out also another item on the docket for Monday the 15th, the city finalizing a spending plan for $12 million in community safety funds aimed at organizations trying to help improve public safety. That's a big deal. There's some urgency behind that because our Seattle Police Department is saying it has been worn thin. More on that coming up in our next segment. Now hear this. Okay, so is the Seattle City Council going to cut another $5.4 million from the Seattle Police Department budget in 2021? This is a hot issue. The council has been arguing about it for months, trying to recover some savings on salary with more officers leaving the department. But the mayor's office is concerned about this, saying we now have a staffing crisis for the SPD. SPD losing more than 200 officers over the past 13 months, shortages on patrols they're talking about now, perhaps jeopardizing the city complying with the consent decree. Interim Chief Adrian Diaz says he is struggling. He says, if you want to keep officers from leaving, it's up to you, City Council. Let's listen.
The best way to stop the losses and to drive hiring is to stop the ad hoc cutting of the budget. We also know the staffing losses some seem to hope for have happened, not through informed process of rethinking or imagining the work we do. But my concern is that if we don't change course, these staffing losses will continue and we will have a staffing crisis beyond mitigation.
Kevin, you brought this up on Seattle City Council Insight. In the past, the police department has come to these council meetings and has come across as rather resigned to these kinds of cuts, but not so last week. The chief, a few deputy mayors are all saying no to these cuts. 911 response times are on the rise. We're not in a good spot right now. Your understanding of how this of how the mayor's office and how the chief is reacting to this.
Yeah, they've went in timid and polite, kind of with a tail between the legs, but not this time. This time they came in hard charging, said, we've had losses. We're now missing our 911 response time goals. Priority 1 is supposed to be within 7 minutes, median. Priority 2 is supposed to be 15 minutes. For the last 7 months of 2020, they missed both of those targets on it. And in September, Chief Diaz moved 100 officers from other units within patrol to specifically to 911 response to stop the response times from getting worse. And he slowed the extent to which they were getting worse. He didn't actually make them better, but slowed down. But what he's saying now is that extra buffer they gave them is all gone because of the continued high attrition in the department.
Yeah.
And now he says if they lose another 50 officers, then those response times, based upon the models they've been running, are going to jump up another 3 minutes.
And that's a big deal. And I want to talk about that because I was really struck by the fact that 52 officers left in the last 2 months of last year, more than quarter of the overall losses, basically, of 2020. And I get the math the council is trying to go through here. We've got some officers leaving, so let's save some money on with this. But I think there's another piece to this, too, and perception might even be part of this. Officers are seeing the council wants to cut their budget even further. Would more of them want to leave? That's the kind of unknown number here. If more officers leave, what happens to the department?
Yeah, and Diaz is pretty blunt about this. He said, he actually said, start with a surprising thing. He said, look, I know you want me to have fewer officers.
Yes, right. He said that.
And given that my pipeline for hiring is, 18 months, I know how many I'm going to be able to hire this year. And I'm not going to be back up where I want to be with this year. And there are some things that I can do that don't involve hiring more officers or like cranking through a bunch of overtime to deal with that.
Right.
But they cost money.
Yes, right.
And if you take away this $5.4 million, you're going to take away my ability to do a bunch of those things because I won't have budget consistency.
Yes. Or any sort of certainty to know what you can spend money on.
And then he said, and let's just be clear, right? You need to stop changing my budget, right? Because I can't manage this department if I don't know what my budget is going to be. So if you keep changing it, you create not only uncertainty for me to be able to sort of invest in these kinds of things, knowing that I can sustain through the year. But to your point earlier, Brian, the police officers are picking up on this. They're seeing this they're seeing that uncertainty as a sign that they should just leave.
Yeah.
And they are.
That's and the chief was talking about that, losing some
Right.
very dear officers that have been around for a while, and that's I won't say leaving, they're completely leaving the profession. They're going right across the border to other cities out there, and that's
Yeah.
a difficult thing here. And I just wonder if there's any sort of middle ground here, because I thought you made a great observation in SCC Insight that towards the end of this meeting, Councilmember Herbold, who heads up the Public Safety Committee, seem to think there might be some middle ground here, maybe ensuring this money goes towards civilian positions like in crime prevention, prevention, et cetera. Do you think that might be the way forward here?
Yeah, there's a bunch of civilian positions that didn't get filled in SPD last year because of the hiring freeze.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those would be helpful to this effort.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's be honest about what the real pressure is on Herbold and the council. The real pressure on Herbold and council is Judge Robart.
Yeah, right. With the consent decree process.
Who chewed them out.
Yeah.
Last month, said very clearly, I have harsh words for the city council.
Yeah.
And made it very clear that he doesn't like the fact that they're cutting SPD's budget without actually having replacements, alternatives in place to pick up these responsibilities.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, if they go down this path, Robart, I guarantee you will get back involved. And probably, we'll figure out a way to intervene to stop this. And this is a weird thing, when you talk to the city, I talk to folks in the city council, I talk to people in the mayor's office, lots of different departments. When you're dealing with something like the court with Judge Robart, right, he doesn't distinguish between the city council and the executive branch or SPD as far as rulings he makes. He can say things and say, like, I'm mad at the city council about this, or I'm mad at SPD about this. But at the end of the day, actions he actually takes are actions against the city.
Yes, as a whole, right.
So he isn't going to take punitive action against the city council. He's going to take punitive action against the city.
Yeah. And that's the difficult part, because I think you heard it from the chief here. He's saying, all right, I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul here in terms of trying to keep the coverage around. And the things that suffer for the department are not only these different hires, like for anti-crime units or whatever else, but then all this training that's so important for the consent decree, other pieces too. That's a piece of this as well.
So they could end up not only in violation of the city charter requirement to make sure they have adequate police coverage across the city, but there are multiple provisions in the consent decree that if they cut the budget, they could end up in violation of. And the police monitor a couple of weeks ago had a Seattle Times op-ed calling out a bunch of these issues. He is apparently going to be reporting to Judge Robart about his thoughts on budget cuts. The city attorney sent on behalf of the city council a memo to the police monitor, just kind of summarizing all the things that have happened with the budget since last summer, because our new police monitor actually came in September. So he came in after all the budget cuts started. So he's still getting a little up to speed on all the issues around that. But so he's going to have some views on this as well.
And he should. And I know Councilmember Herbold will be taking this up again in her committee on the 23rd of March. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. I want to move on to another challenging topic here with you, Kevin. The Black Brilliance Report. This, the $3 million contract awarded by the City Council to study where $30 million in participatory budgeting funds should go. Some more concerns here. As reported in Publicola last week, the city's Finance and Administrative Services Department, FAS, has written to the state auditor saying there's more to look at here. The auditor is already investigating this, and we heard this from Crosscut a few months ago. But to start with, Kevin, this isn't something FAS usually does. What do you see going on here?
Yeah, it's not too hard to look at that and say that was it was ghostwritten by the mayor's office.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any official proof that that's what happened, but certainly letters like that don't go out with the mayor's approval. Right. Publicola, reported that Calvin Goings, the director of the FAS, was not happy about that. I don't. That's not a reporting that I've done, so I don't really know for sure if that's true or not. But yeah. So I would put this in larger context.
Sure.
The city auditor reports to the city council.
Right.
And one of the things the city council often does is ask them to go just investigate and come back with advisory opinions on issues.
Yes.
Right? And the attorney general's office and the state auditor do that sort of at the state level too.
Yes. Right.
They go off and just come back with advisory opinions on things. On, what's the best way, what's the best practice? Look at other cities or states. What's the best practice for handling this kind of situation, right? So some of the questions that are in that letter from FAS to the state auditor, which came out after the state auditor and FAS had a conversation about this whole Block Brilliance project, are things like, hey, can you look at issues like, actually, one we just sort of touched on a second ago, is the city auditor's office is under the city council, which means
in the legislative branch.
It's a conflict of interest for the city auditor to investigate anything in the legislative branch, right?
Which was the big issue here. Yeah.
Is that a best practice? The legislative branch has oversight of the executive branch, and the executive branch is by far the largest chunk of city government.
Yeah.
But to the extent that the city council is going to go do things like it did here, where say, we're going to keep $3 million and we're going to issue and manage this contract ourselves.
Right.
They did that with 50K, 100K contracts.
Sure. But 3 million,
research. But 3 million is a different matter altogether, and this one clearly went wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where there's no option. There's no avenue for the city auditor to go audit this thing, really investigate it.
Yeah.
So, what is the best practice there? That's one of the issues that FAS asked the state auditor to weigh in. And what I'm hearing is the state auditor is not going to do that. Right?
Yeah.
That's really sort of outside kind of their purview of what they have to do. So
but just the fact the letter has been sent, I think, sends a message of some sort in terms of what the mayor's office is thinking about this for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the other piece of it too, you wrote about this, Kevin, this whole idea of earmarks, and is the city council allowed to do that? I think that's another issue that comes up with this as well.
Yeah. So, under the city charter, the city council can't write into the budget an appropriation to go to a specific organization.
Right.
And they go right up the line every single time. They write, their budget things where they say, this is $500,000 to an organization such as, right. It was like nod, wink, wink. We all know what's really going on here with this.
Yeah.
But in this case, because the city council not only appropriated the money in the budget, but also issued the contract and decided to give it to King County Equity Now.
Yep.
If you put those two together, did that just violate the city charter?
Right.
So, when the city council appropriates the money, but then it's up to the executive branch to actually decide, okay, do we bid this out, or do we just give this contract to a particular, contractor, that we've worked with before and we appreciate. And there are, monetary limitations around that. They're supposed to bid out anything about 53K, with a couple exceptions. But the city charter doesn't say the executive branch can't pick a particular organization. It just says city council
can't,
responsible for appropriating the money. Right. Executive branch can't appropriate money.
Yes.
They can just spend what the city council appropriates for that.
That's
so there's kind of this separation of powers.
Yes.
City council gets to say, you get to go spend money in this. The executive branch says, okay, we're going to spend it with this organization.
Yes.
But if you put those two together within the city council, does that violate the city charter? That's a good question.
I think it is a good question. I just want to make sure I take the much larger context, Kevin, because you've spoken with a number of different groups about this, including King County Equity Now. And that's the part that I think is the most painful out of all this. This is important work when it comes to participatory budgeting. It needs to happen. King County Equity Now is kind of on the outside looking in saying, we can't support this process. What comes out of all this, do you think? I mean, beyond all this legislative runaround that we're talking about right now?
I think, I think it's going to be difficult. The executive branch, HSD and Department of Neighborhoods and Deputy Mayor Tiffany Washington are really in the lead right now in figuring out, how are we going to run this $30 million participatory budgeting process? And they have some hard questions. One of the questions, one of the issues that King County Equity Now raised, which is really the reason they've now taken a stand and said we can't support this participatory budgeting process in the way it's been formed, is because a big part of this is say let's make some investments in the Black community, and the entire city is going to decide what investments should be made in the Black community. Right. And they said, you can agree with them, you can not agree with them, but they said, look, a majority white population in the city should not be deciding what the Black community needs. Right. The Black community should be deciding what the Black community needs.
That's
again, there's all sorts of room for debate about the various issues that are involved in that.
Of course.
But that's what they're saying with this. Right.
That's a central one there.
So they're at the moment they're out.
Yeah.
And Gary Equinox like, nope, we're out on this.
That's a difficult bottom line to hear on this one. And I should point out there's no specific timeline from the state auditor for a report on Black brilliance and all these other matters we've been talking about, but it's certainly one that city leaders are going to be keeping a close eye on, and we will too. I want to move on to our final segment here. What's next? All right, it's vaccination time, Kevin. The new mass vaccination site opening at Lumen Field over this past weekend. Governor Inslee saying we're going to move to phase 3 as a state later on here in March. The Mariners saying we're going to have fans in the stands this year. Insert jokes about the Mariners here. We've got some good news, though, on the horizon with COVID, it seems. What do you think it's going to take to get Seattle to that magic number of 70% vaccination and all that kind of stuff for herd immunity? Any thoughts about this, Kevin?
Vaccines. It's going to take vaccines.
Right.
Tons this is the thing we've been waiting months for, right?
Yeah.
The arguably you go back and we've had a lot of raging debate about equity and how to distribute the vaccines the shots, that we've had so far. But that's really all a second order problem. The first order problem all along has been there's just been this little trickle of vaccines. And from everything the federal government is saying now, that is going to change in a big way in the next few weeks, right? Where they're really going to ramp up that volume. President Biden is now saying he's going to require all jurisdictions to open up vaccinations to all adults starting May 1st. And that they think that they're going to have enough vaccines out there to vaccinate all adults by the end of May.
That's a big deal.
Woo-hoo. I mean, that's going to be massive. A fantastic thing if we can get there. But a lot needs to happen between. So, whereas in the early days, you could say, a bunch of, without any guidance from the, end days Trump administration as to how many vaccines were going to get shipped out. The state, the county, the city, everybody was guessing. It's like, and trying to figure out, okay, how much infrastructure we build out, how many appointments do we offer, all this stuff based on our best guess of how many, and everybody guessed wrong. Everybody guessed high. Right. And now we're coming back around to this, and after resetting everybody's expectations, we're now coming back and saying, okay, are they really going to show up this time? Before we go, open up Lumen Field for 100,000 vaccinations a week, things like that. Are they really going to show up? Are we going to have them to be able to give out?
And I think a few eyes are going to be on Seattle with this one, touting itself as one of the largest COVID vaccine sites in the entire country. And they're talking about as many as 22,000 vaccines per day. So definitely something we're all going to be keeping track of. And I can't wait. I can't wait to tear the sleeves off this shirt and get vaccinated myself. So
I can't wait to get my vaccination either.
We will make it happen soon, Kevin, I promise. All right. We try to wrap up our show with a sample of some good things to have with your coffee during that coffee break. Kevin's master baking skills always coming to the fore here. Kevin, we've got more Easter season cookies in the Callanan home. Full disclosure, I already took a bite of this one. My daughter's made some frosted snickerdoodles, and they teach me something new every week. But in this case here, I have learned that apparently the use of brown sugar makes for a softer cookie than the traditional granulated sugar. Have you found that to be true in your baking? What your thoughts about that?
It depends what you mix it with, right? It's about the amount of liquid you have in it.
They're saying, I'll talk with my mouth full. They're saying that the brown sugar soaks up a little bit more of that moisture and kind of keeps it in there. I don't know. That's what I am tasting here, perhaps.
Yeah,
but that's the theory at work there. Kind of what you're mixing with it, I guess.
Yeah, how much moisture you're adding. Whether there are any other ingredients, what temperature you bake it at, which will, have a big effect on how much moisture you lose. Right. From that thing, right? How is it going to end up, biscotti dry, or is it going to end up nice and moist? That's all about temperature and how long you cook it for and all that. So,
indeed.
So it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's a big, it's a big chemistry set in your kitchen.
You know what? We're going to stick with this story week after week until we completely figure it out, Kevin.
So were there jimmies on that?
Oh yeah. You got the rainbow sprinkles, man. We're not messing around. I got to make sure they don't fall off there, because that is arguably the best part of this.
Yeah, they get on the microphone there, and it's just
covered with jimmies. Can't be having that. Well, I thank you as always, Kevin, for your insights on baking and all things public affairs.
Thank you, sir.
All righty. Thanks, everybody, for listening here to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Again, please support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. For the $10 level, we're handing out these mugs to everybody out there, your very own. So make sure you get involved with that. We do need your help to keep this podcast afloat. That's the taste of good podcasting right there. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2000.